Hello, welcome to the latest episode of my Knitting and Creative podcast. My name on Instagram is Orchid's Heart, and this episode is going to be slightly different because it's going to be a bit of a Q&A Ask Me Anything style episode. So I'm wearing today my Oversized Seasons Cardigan by Ozetta, knit in Gilliatt yarn in the colourway Salt and Pepper, which I believe is Poivre et Sel. I'm pretty sure it's that colourway. I could be wrong. Yes, and I'm wearing it over a second-hand dress that I bought online, and it's a dress by Not Perfect Linen, and I am really unsure about the colour of it. It's not really a colour I would normally choose to wear, but buying these clothes outside of the EU is a bit tricky now due to Brexit, and it was a good deal. So I might dye it at some point, but at the moment I'm wearing it, so I just think the colour is a bit close to my colour tone. So I'm recording this bang in the middle of July, 1 week before my baby is due, to put this video up maybe sometime in August. So I'm a bit breathless and I've just woken up from a nap, which went on a little bit too long, a little bit later in the day than I had intended. And when you're seeing this, I am probably distinctly less refreshed with a newborn baby, hopefully. And I might be, whilst we're recording this video, knitting on this little Ellen's cardigan, which is patterned by Petite Knit, for said baby, although the size on this I think is like the second size, and it doesn't start at newborn, it is for an older baby. So we shall see. And I've got my questions on my screenshot on my laptop, which you guys sent to me on Instagram, and there was one comment on the last YouTube video which I mentioned I might do one of these videos. So I'll be looking at my laptop to get the questions and then talking you through my answers. So I hope you're all doing okay. I hope future me is doing okay. Current me cannot imagine what sort of life current me whilst you're watching this is having, so that's a weird thought. But anyway, so my first question, and these aren't in order of when they were sent to me, to be honest, I just screenshot them and sent them to myself on WhatsApp. So Happiest at Home asked, how long have I been knitting for and who taught me? So my grandmother tried to teach me to knit maybe 5 times growing up, and I just really couldn't get my head around it. I did lots of sewing, I did lots of cross stitch, I did lots of crafts, was very creative and very into textiles, but knitting was something that never really stuck. I found it really, really hard. And then when I was living in Paris in my early 20s, I did learn to crochet. Was that when I was living in Paris? Yeah, towards the end. I'd already met my partner at that point, and to be perfectly honest, I decided I wanted to learn to crochet, and we had a book. I must have been back visiting at the time, and he taught himself to crochet from the book in 5 minutes. Obviously, you know, the basic stitch, rudimentary, in a rudimentary way, and then he taught me, because I'm not very good at looking at picture instructions in a book and then trying to work that out into real life, whereas he's an engineer, so he's really good with instructions and like spatial awareness and, you know, flipping things around in your mind and things like that, which I'm not very good at. And so I did learn to crochet, and I crocheted for quite a long time because I had this belief for some reason I thought crochet was easier than knitting. And if I'm honest, I probably just had the persistence in that moment to want to learn to crochet, whereas I probably wasn't bothered about learning to knit growing up. And then it must have been in 2019, because it was before lockdown, I was really bored and I decided I'm going to learn to knit, because I had been crocheting some garments, but I much prefer the look of knitted garments to crochet garments, and I thought, well, I think it's high time that I learnt. And I was just really envious of people I knew who could knit. My mum was starting to learn to knit socks. Knitted socks were one of my favourite things ever. So I thought I'll just learn. So I went to the charity shop and I bought some straight needles and some cheap yarn. And they asked me, oh, do you know how to knit? And I said, no, I'm going to learn today. And they looked at me like, what? Obviously, I didn't learn that day. So it was actually YouTube that taught me. And persistence. I just really went for it with watching YouTube tutorials. And I now realise that probably for the first 9 months at least, I was knitting everything twisted. I think I was knitting through the back loop on my purl stitches or something. No, I think I was knitting through the back loop. So when I was knitting flat or rib, it was fine. But when I was knitting in the round, it was really obvious. And I remember that when I went to Mexico the first time, I was knitting on by that point, I was knitting a green Felix cropped pullover, and it was all twisted. So that was 2019, end of 2019 I would have been learning to knit, because when I went to Mexico and I was knitting that green jumper, that was when COVID kicked off, because I was there when most of the world went into lockdown in March 2020. So that's forever ingrained in my brain that I was knitting that green jumper in Mexico in 2020. So I have been knitting, that means I've been knitting for about 4 years, give or take. Probably to start with, I found it quite difficult and frustrating. And I think the thing that made it so difficult and frustrating was that I was using really cheap circular needles that weren't the right length for projects. I didn't really understand. It just took me a long time to grasp the idea of needle length, needle size, gauge, and good materials, if that makes sense. Not that I'm advocating you get the most expensive, but once I started using Knit Pro needles and understanding gauge and needle length a bit better, then that really helped. So about 4 years, and nobody particularly taught me, it was just YouTube. YouTube and practice. I will say in terms of learning from YouTube, what's her name? Very Pink Knits was incredibly helpful and still is kind of my go-to person. If I want to look up a technique, her videos are fantastic, and she does quite a lot of like really slow technique videos where something like you see like doing a German short row like so slowly it takes 5 minutes to watch it, which is excessive for most things, and I wouldn't need that now, but for some things when they really don't click and you're learning, it's really helpful to see it that slow. And she just explains things really well, and her videos aren't full of faffy rubbish. Like her normal short row video is something like 2 minutes long. It's not 15 because it's full of some horrendously long prelude and conclusion, which drives me mad. When you're in the middle of the pattern, you just want to know how to do the thing. You don't want to hear their life story at the same time. So that's really great. I really like her. And now who's teaching me most is probably Andrea Mowry. I really like her, what's it called? Her series that she does. I've forgotten the name of it. I watch it every week and I can't remember. But she does a video every week and people send in questions and she answers them. So I find that really helpful and really useful, and I really enjoy those videos because sometimes you hear nuggets of information that you didn't even know you needed, and so that's good. And other times it just reminds you, I did know that. I did know 2-ply yarn was better for lace knitting and 3-ply yarn was better for cable knitting, but I'm glad I've reminded myself of that because when I do my next project, I will know that information again. So yeah, I'll knit if I want to, that's what she calls it. So yes, so that's how long I've been knitting and who taught me. I'm just checking it's recording because my phone is low on battery. So, I can't really see the name. Anna Likes Birds, maybe? Asks, what has been your favourite and least favourite knitting project? So I was kind of thinking about this the other day because my mum was wearing my tulip pullover and she was like, oh, I really like this. And I was like, no, never again. She was like, why? And I said, I really hated knitting it. I really didn't enjoy knitting it. So let me think, what has actually been my favourite and least favourite knitting project? I have a couple of knitting projects I really hated doing and I absolutely love wearing. The category of that would be the tulip pullover. I absolutely love wearing it. I hated knitting it. I think it's because mine was really dense. I used whatever the recommended needles were, 2 strands of Plutelope and 1 strand of mohair, and I think maybe I should have gone up 0.5 millimetre on my needle size to make it more comfortable, because it was really uncomfortable. However, the fit is glorious and I love wearing it, and it's my most worn jumper and would look very nice with this dress actually when it gets colder. Other jumpers or projects I hated knitting but really enjoyed wearing. I'm not sure that anything else really stands out. I didn't enjoy knitting my Beetle Magic cardigan by Katie Greenbean. Nothing to do with her pattern, it was my yarn choice and needle combination again. And I don't actually wear it that much. And again, it's nothing to do with the pattern, it's because the yarn is a bit scratchy. I find it a bit uncomfortable. It's just not pleasurable wear, it's too rustic. And not in like a Let Lopey rustic way, it's kind of rustic in a, I don't know, rough, solid kind of way. I can't really explain it. I really like rustic yarn, I really like Icelandic yarn. This just doesn't feel very good. Like maybe it wasn't a very good yarn to use on a garment, possibly. So, other least favourite projects. Is there anything I've knit that I think is truly a disaster? I don't think so, because I think I would just rip it out. The Felix jumper I just mentioned, my first one, it was green and all twisted. I did actually rip it out and re-knit it. I went up 1/2 needle size. I added some mohair and went up a garment size and turned it into a cardigan, and I wear it loads and I get loads of compliments on it, just because it was all twisted and small and seized up and horrid looking. Because again, I didn't really understand gauge when I knit it. I think it's an Aran weight pattern. I used DK yarn. I didn't know what I was doing, which is fine because I was new to garment knitting. But yeah, so there's some projects I didn't enjoy knitting. What were my favourite knitting projects? Well, so my tulip pullover is one of my favourite knitting projects to wear. But in terms of projects I really enjoyed knitting, I really enjoyed knitting the Fern and Feather by Jennifer Steinglass. It was my first colourwork project and it's in Let Lopey. And just the needle size and the yarn combination and the satisfaction of doing the colourwork for the first time, because it's actually quite simple colourwork, on the round yoke. It just felt so glorious. And there's something about, I can't remember if the colour number I used is 85 or 58. It would be in one of my videos where I talk about the Let Lopey. There's probably a photo somewhere where you can see the yoke of it in progress on the thumbnail, which I'll share the colour code. There is a particular shade of Oatmeal Let Lopey, which I absolutely love, and it seems to feel really good when you knit with it. I don't know why. So I've used it for a couple of things. And I just love knitting with it, so that definitely makes a big difference. So that was one of my favourite knitting projects. Another favourite knitting project at points has been socks. I go through phases of just generally being sock obsessed and wanting to knit all the socks because I love wearing knitted socks. Sorry, my partner came home through the door and I got nervous and shy. Because I'm not that far from the front door, so you'd be able to hear what I was saying. And I was talking about favourite knitting projects. So quite often socks, definitely Fern and Feather in Let Lopey. But what else have I knit that I've really enjoyed knitting? I'm really enjoying all these baby knits, to be honest, because they're quite quick to knit. But that's a bit of a cop-out. Oh, I know. Probably The Birds of a Feather Shawl by Andrea Mowry. I've knit that twice. And I just really like the shape of that shawl. It's a really strangely shaped triangular shawl. And I knit one in Broom 4-ply by Daughter of a Shepherd, which is a really lovely rustic brown yarn. And I absolutely love that project. I really enjoyed knitting it because it's quite easy. It's mostly stockinette. No, it's mostly garter, with some quite easy lace, and the yarn was absolutely lovely, and the final project is just perfect. I think it's my most worn shawl. It's really squishy and soft and rustic, so I really enjoyed that project. I'm sure there's others. If I think of others, I'll put them in the thing below. I really think it depends where I am at that time in my knitting mood. Maybe I would change what my favourite project would be. What's my favourite yarn? So that's kind of connected to that previous one. One of the, well, previous answer, definitely that Let Lopi in that colour, so I probably should find the code below. And the Daughter of a Shepherd broom yarn. She does it in a 4-ply and an Aran weight, and I actually have some Aran weight broom in my stash because she was doing a 50% off sale, which I'm going to knit a ranunculus with, which is a project for this autumn for sure. I'm really looking forward to knitting that. I think it'd be glorious. And I really love the idea of having a garment in the broom yarn. So they're both yarns I absolutely love. I also actually really like knitting colourwork in the Gilliatt yarn by rerum Natura. It's surprisingly bouncy and stretchy. It is a merino, but it's not a superwash merino, and it's there are some undyed colours, which I think this might be one of them, and they're not flat. Like, there is a bit of complexity to the colour, which I really like. I'm not the biggest fan of flat colours. I quite like yarns that are dyed on like natural bases that have some complexity to them so that it shines through with the colour. So yeah, it's quite a bouncy yarn, which makes it really nice for colour work. I knit my mother-in-law a Maya cardigan in it, which I did really enjoy knitting actually, and used that for the colour work, and that was really lovely. I think maybe if you have problems with tension in your colour work, then the Gilliatt and the thinner version, which is Ulysses, is probably quite a good yarn to try, because I think the bounciness probably makes the tension thing a bit easier. So I really like those yarns. I know you've asked what is your favourite yarn, but you know, I'm giving you a couple. I really like the feel of the Drover sock yarn by Daughter of a Shepherd on my feet. It's not the most durable. There is a bit of nylon in there, but only 10%. But oh no, I'm getting myself muddled. I knit a pair of socks using the Garthenor Snowdonia sock for most of it, and then the Drover for the heels, toes, the heels and toes. I also knit an entire pair of socks in the Drover. So both of those, the Snowdonia and the Drover. The Snowdonia has no nylon, and the Drover has 10%. I really enjoy the feel of both of those on my feet because they're quite woolly, as well as the Exmoor sock by John Arbon, which has 25% nylon in it, but it's still quite a rustic sock yarn. So I really enjoy those. They just feel extra warm than like superwash merino nylon does. What else do I really like yarn wise? Let Lopi. I do quite enjoy the feel of wearing an unspun yarn with mohair. I'm not sure it's my favourite thing to knit with, but a couple of my favourite garments I've knit have been in that combination of unspun with mohair that I like wearing. I've tried Mancha Lopi, which is really soft, Pluto Lopi, which is rougher but easier to knit with. I've tried, maybe that's it. I've got a tiny bit of Nutridon in my stash. I tried another unspun. I know I have got another unspun in my stash, but I'm not knit with yet. Yeah, so there's some of my favourite yarns. Maybe quite a predictable answer. I'm sure there's something else I've not thought of. I think there is a really strong kind of, there are yarns that I really like to wear, maybe, and then yarns I really like to knit, but actually maybe they do end up being the same. I really liked the feel of the Garthenor Presley yarn. That was a really nice yarn to knit with and wear actually. It's really soft and the colours are lovely. I knit something in the colour butternut and I absolutely love it. Which is a 4-ply yarn. Yeah. Forest Path Knits asks, have I ever had a knitting slump? Definitely. Sometimes I do get bored of knitting. you haven't asked what do I do about it, but I guess maybe that's interesting. I don't know. Have I ever had knitting slump? Yes, I have. I'll just have some water. Which usually means it's a sign to stop working whatever I'm working on and maybe try something else. Something easier or smaller or less complicated, maybe. Or maybe I just need to pick up another craft for a while. Or maybe I just need a break. I think definitely I've had phases, like at the moment, where I'm knitting quite a lot. But probably that means that it's possible when the baby comes, maybe I won't want to knit as much for a little while. And I will feel a bit of a knitting slump, or I'll really want to knit loads. I don't know. I don't know which way it's going to go. But, you know, that's fine. I've got a few other things I could do. I've got an embroidery project sort of queued up that I could work on. Or sometimes you really just need to rest and have a break from these activities. I did go through a bit of a knitting slump a while back. I ended up just reading more, which I hadn't done for a really long time. So it was actually really refreshing. Or maybe it's a sign I need to get outside more rather than just sitting home knitting. But yes, so I have had a knitting slump. My way of dealing with it is usually to try something different, a different project, or just have a conscious break and come back to it. Someone has asked, what do I do as a job? So I am on maternity leave at the moment, but normally I work for a disability charity and I work on a really glorious creative team, and I organise, or I help support organising creative sessions, basically workshops for people with disabilities. So yeah, that's what I do. So it is predominantly a desk job for me, but I work around a lot of creative people and lots of people from different backgrounds, and we work with a lot of freelancers, and it's really interesting. Yeah, love it. So I do work at a desk, but I'm also exposed to quite a lot of creativity all the time and surrounded by some pretty amazing people. So yes. And if anyone was wondering how I ended up in that job, purely by accident. I actually had no idea what I wanted to do when I finished university. I studied American literature, and I just had no idea. I really don't feel like I was ever given much support trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And when I moved back to England after having done some teaching at a French university, I was completely like, oh, I guess I've got to become a teacher then. Like no insult at teachers or being a teacher, it just wasn't really for me. But I couldn't think what else I could do with my life. And I ended up getting a just stopgap job at this charity because it was within walking distance from where I live, and I was adamant that I didn't want to be a burden on my partner when I first moved in with him, and that I wanted to get a job and earn a bit of money so that I could contribute. And I thought, oh, I'll just get a job here for a few months doing, you know, it was like reception work, things like that, until I figure out what I'm going to do. And I ended up finding out about this part of the work, and probably took me about 5 years to wheedle into it, but you know, patience paid off, and that's how I ended up doing it. So yeah, it was purely by accident. I had no idea that kind of work existed. So Slugs and Snails, hello, has messaged saying, what's my favourite yarn, weight, brand, type, etc. So I've mentioned a few of my favourite yarns, but in terms of weight and type, definitely I've mentioned a few of my favourite brands. I prefer the look and feel of wearing 4-ply weight garments, definitely. Are they my favourite to knit? Probably not, because it's quite tedious. I prefer knitting DK weight projects. Quite enjoy knitting the odd Aran weight project when I do those. But I really try not to get sucked into knitting something just because it's a thicker weight, rather than, you know, I do try to pick projects that I'm actually going to wear and enjoy wearing. So things like the Felix pullover, that's an Aran weight project, but I do really enjoy wearing it. This is an Aran weight project, so I do really enjoy wearing that. So that's not really an issue. But yeah, so My favourite weight of yarn to wear, 4-ply, to knit, probably DK or Aran. I feel like that's probably across the board. My favourite brands would be definitely Eastex, which do Let Lopi and Pluto Lopi, etc. Daughter of a Shepherd. Who else do I buy from quite often? This can't be so hard. I have so many yarns that I like. Garthenor, John Arbon. How have I not mentioned them yet? Their yarns are glorious. I knit something in, like I bought some scraps when I went to the open mill day last year, not the year just gone, and it was in the, is it Viola DK? I think it's discontinued, and it's glorious. Oh, it's such a lovely plump yarn. I really like the Yarnadelic yarn. The Yarnadelic yarn is gorgeous. It feels amazing. It's quite, it comes I think in a sport and a worsted weight. The colours are just stunning. So yeah, John Arbon, pretty much any yarn they make, I really like them. And in terms of type, going back to brands, John Arbon, Daughter of a Shepherd, Eastex. I do like these, the Gilliatt and Ulysses. I quite enjoy some of the yarns I've used by Camarose, including their mohair substitute, which is like a Tencel alpaca blend. The Midnight Soul. I mean, there's a couple. Yeah. Would like to try more by Wool Dreamers. Their yarns are really nice. I've only tried the Manchalopi though. My favourite type, and so I think when she says Merino, BFL, etc. You mean what, if I've got any favourite breeds? Merino is not very high on my list, but mostly because the Merinos are quite bland. I mean, this is Merino, but I think it's more of an unusual Merino, like it's non-superwash. It's undyed, it's got some complexity in colour, etc. So Merinos like that I do quite enjoy. This is probably Merino, which I'm knitting the baby cardigan from, but you know, it's soft superwash for the baby. But normally, BFL I do quite like because it's got quite a long staple length, and I think it's quite a common breed of sheep in England, like West Yorkshire spinners use it a lot, and I don't mind some of their yarns actually. So yeah, definitely BFL. My favourite I think is Gotland. Gotland blended with something. I absolutely love Gotland yarn. I've had a few encounters with it. I absolutely love it. I think I've had a BFL Massam mix as well that I really enjoyed. So that's nice. I should probably look up what's in the Broom yarn by Daughter of a Shepherd, because whatever that is I clearly like. I like rustic yarns that aren't too rustic, ideally. I know Let Lopi, the Icelandic yarn, is really rustic, but that would be something I would not wear on my bare skin. I'd wear it over a decent quality long sleeve top. I can't wear it at all at the moment because my tummy is extra sensitive with pregnancy, and like even really not scratchy things set it off. So I am leaning more towards the merino type garments at the moment because my tummy isn't happy with anything touching it. I recently bought some new linen pyjamas thinking, oh, this would be glorious to wear right now, and I can't wear them because the linen hasn't been broken in, and so it is objectively not scratchy, it's linen, but there's something about it that's prickling my skin, whereas if they were secondhand I probably would have been okay, so that's a bit annoying. And I can't bring myself to wash something multiple times before I actually wear it. Seems like a waste. What other? I think I quite like most, like, trying different breeds. I've definitely given you a few of my favourites, but I think there is a lot more that I could learn about breeds and what they're good for. Wensleydale I quite enjoy, that's a nice one. But yeah, so there's some ideas. And back to the start of those questions on Instagram. So there was one, I think, on my video. about sewing. Midnight Horse says, I would really love your advice on learning to sew in easy projects. I'm so curious but don't know where to start. Okay. I don't know that I'm an expert on where to start because my process was incredibly slow. I started when I was quite young, so I came to it probably a bit organically. But I mean, I've mentioned before, I think Sew Liberated is really, really good for learning to knit and for basic sewing projects, because most of her patterns have like a way of doing the project easier or harder. I'm thinking of like the estuary skirt, no, not the estuary skirt, the gypsum skirt. You can do it with all the flat felled seams and the pockets and all the rest of it, or you can do it with normal seams and no pockets, and it's just a basic elasticated waist skirt. Then that might be a good one to start with, because you could do it as a basic no pocket elasticated waist skirt, and then graduate doing inseam pockets, then the fancy pockets that make it look like the gypsum skirt with the flat felled seams, etc. Like, you could add new techniques, and you don't have to fit it because it's an elasticated waist skirt, so there's no fitting involved really. The elastic will fit it to your waist. That might be a good place to start. I think really you just got to pick a pattern that is really clear and easy to follow. So I do think her patterns are really good for that, because they normally give you like tips and explanations. But if you're not even at that point and you're still learning to sew, if I was learning to sew now, I would probably try and find somewhere I could do 1 or 2 classes to get to grips and over the initial shock of how scared I was about learning. Because that's me, when I haven't done something before, I'm like really nervous about it. It takes me ages to get around to it. And that's how I approached spinning. I went to go do 20 minutes of spinning with somebody in person, and then that gave me the confidence to start teaching myself properly. Like to get over that first hurdle. So I would try and do that, and then YouTube. I'd YouTube the hell out of everything. Maybe I would see if there were any video tutorials on making a Sew Liberated pattern. I feel like her patterns are so popular that probably somebody has made that tutorial where you can sew along with them in the video. Or I would see if there is a similar video for another pattern, maybe. If you like were to Google or go on YouTube, sew along or video tutorial on something, try those, like video tutorial sewing patterns, something like that. See what comes up, and if you recognise any of the brand names for the patterns, and maybe if it's an easy one, try and do that. Otherwise, easy patterns. There is a vest top by True Bias that has a V-neck. I'll try and put the name down below. And I think it's got no darts. It's a front and a back with straps. Ogden cami. That's easy. What other things have I made that easy? Tinning the button patterns tend to be quite easy, but I've fallen out of love with them. I don't think I really like the style, but that's personal preference. You might feel differently. I think generally anything that isn't like sculpted shape-wise or has an elasticated waist or isn't fitted would probably be your friend. And things that are in a woven fabric, because that's easier to handle. And yeah, and go from there. And just accept that your first few projects probably are going to look terrible, and that's okay. So maybe using old thrifted bed sheets. We use our bed sheets until they get holes in, and so at some point you pretty much always get a hole in the same place. The rest of the bed sheet is generally fine, and you can usually make some kind of like sample out of that. And yeah, and if you are a knitter, because maybe you probably are, because you're commenting on a video where I talk about, well no, that was a Ozetta jumpsuit one actually. But if you follow me, you probably are a knitter, because it's predominantly what I'm talking about. You know, like knitting is all these variations on the same movement, you know, like the basic knit stitch and purl stitch, that's basically all knitting is. and by tweaking it slightly we can achieve lots of different outcomes. I would say, to be honest, sewing is very similar. You know, like ultimately once you can handle your sewing machine and sew a straight line, you're just using variations of that straight line, and you can build on it slowly. My only like big thing is again, as with knitting, it made such a huge difference to me when I moved away from just using a cheap piece of machinery to something a bit better. My biggest frustration when I was trying to move from being an okay sewer to a sewer making clothes that I'm happy wearing out in public and don't feel like I'm screaming, I made this. Nothing wrong with that, but like in terms of quality, of finish and feeling proud and happy with my results. A big change for me was investing in a decent sewing machine, which I didn't do, it was a present actually, but I used to have a cheap second-hand Brother sewing machine, and I spent most of my time battling with it and crying and getting upset and stressed out because it wouldn't work, it would jam up, I didn't really understand the tension, etc. And then my mother-in-law, one year someone passed away in their family and she wanted to use some of the money on a present that I would use a lot, which is really sweet and lovely. This was probably about 5 years ago, and she suggested a sewing machine, and so I'll put the brand and it's a Genome, but I'll put what number it is below, and it has automatic tensioning, and I swear to God, life-changing moment, automatic tensioning. It made such a big deal because the tension thing I didn't really ever get my head around very well, and the pleasure and the confidence and the ease that that gave me, I mean from that point onwards I was flying. So yeah, I mean, not that it solved everything, but it made things much easier and I could focus on what I needed to focus on rather than having eternal mental breakdowns over my sewing machine jamming up. So it did make a big difference having a much better running sewing machine. I'm not saying that you need to spend lots of money on a good sewing machine, but maybe when you go to these, if you do find somewhere where you can do classes, I mean their sewing machines will probably be good quality ones, and so you can kind of get a gist for what I mean. Or maybe you can borrow one from someone, or, you know, buy a decent quality second-hand one, and if it doesn't work out you can probably sell it again for the same amount of money you paid for it. Maybe. So even if it does end up costing you a couple of hundred second-hand, you know, you haven't lost anything if you then have to sell it again. Meanwhile, if it works out, then you've invested once rather than investing twice, which would be cheaper. So I don't know if that helps, hopefully it does, but I definitely would say not a structured garment, something not fitted or fitted with elastic, with clear instructions, and I do really rate Sew Liberated. I think that's why they're so popular, because I think they are quite good for learning. And the Hinterland dress, which I made a video about before, is very similar to this dress that I'm wearing now actually. So yeah, I mean, that would also be quite easy if you weren't going to do the buttons. Or you could do the button placket, which isn't that bad, and rather than doing buttonholes, you could do a fake, you know, you could do it fake and just stitch it down and sew the buttons on top by hand, so you don't have to worry about buttonholes. Or you could hammer in poppers. That's another kettle of fish. It's easy. You buy a tool and you just hammer them in, and then you don't have to worry about buttonholes. But yeah, a few ideas for you, so good luck. And that's everything. That was all the questions today, so I'm going to end the video there. Hopefully all recorded and there was no problems with my phone. I will find out in a minute. But yes, I hope you're all doing well. I'm hoping to like cue record another video before the baby comes, so that might be the next video if my planning is correct. And so maybe it'll be a little while before you see actual current me, but yeah, I'm sure I'm still catching up with you all on Instagram, if you want to find me over there. So as mentioned, I'm Orchid's Heart on Instagram. I'm also on Ko-fi and on Ravelry under the same name, so if you want to find me in any of those places and see what I'm getting up to, then there you go. Alright, thank you very much. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.